Hello guys, welcome back to another episode of The Copper Dump. I am joined today with Dr. Robert Selig, leading expert in hair tissue mineral analysis. Do you want to just introduce yourself for everybody that is not familiar with your work?
Sure. My name is Dr. Robert Selig, and I've been a chiropractor, since the late 90s. So I've been in this game for a while, and I've been doing hair analysis for probably over, about 20 years or so. And again, I think everyone in the healing profession starts off as the wounded healer. And so my goal was I had to fix myself before I could earn the rite of passage to help others. And so my, healing journey has been pretty fascinating, dealing with copper dumps, nickel dumps, many, many metal dumps. But at this stage in the game, it's the best I've ever felt in my life. So I keep at it. And every decade, I want to get a little bit healthier. So I keep working at it. And my goal is to turn people on to mineral balancing, detoxification, and to give them a deeper understanding of these minerals, because they're just not soulless electrons, protons floating in space. Every mineral has an energy of the cosmology, and I want to bring that into the biochemical world, because healing has always been an art and a science. So some people are too much in the art part, some people are too much in the science part. The goal is to bring those two roads together, the yin and the yang, bring it together for a real healing modality. And I find that hair mineral balancing gives us the best window to really move the healing needle to exalt our health to a much better place. So that's the quick intro on me.
Very fascinating, especially you talk a lot about, calcification, copper toxicity. I talk about copper toxicity all the time on my page, especially with women. I never really see copper not ever being an issue with my clients. And one thing that they don't understand is copper can hide. And so they'll go and just get their hair analysis done and think that they have low copper and start supplementing high amounts of beef liver, and then they feel great temporarily and then they just crash. And so I think it's so important to bring so much awareness to the minerals, and that we can't ever just look at one. They have to be looked at as a whole.
Absolutely. It's that's why it's mineral balancing. It's never looking at one mineral in isolation. And so when we do look at copper, because it's, one of the most conductive elements on the periodic table, silver's number one, copper's number two, but silver's not a nutrient mineral, copper is. Because of its conductivity, it moves electrons better than anything, and it's the movement of electrons that is the chemical secret to life. How these electrons move, physics doesn't understand. They had to take the quantum leap into understanding the, kind of the ethereal energy of the movement of electrons in copper, because it's so emotional and because it's associated with the planet Venus, has all the themes regarding that high electrical themes like love, sex, fertility, beauty, art. All those themes, we have an inner conflict with, all those themes. And this is part of the dysregulation of copper. It's not understanding the energy of it. And this is where I'm hoping that instead of just doing the bean counting of trying to micromanage every nutrient, understand the energy of these metals gives us more of an insight of to why we may be having a copper toxicity. Where do we have a conflict with relationships? Where do we have a conflict with sex? Where do we have a conflict with beauty? And those are big, big themes in our everyday culture. And so the whole goal with copper is it's either going to become venerated or it becomes venereal. And so that's the path we have with copper. Do we venerate the copper essence, or does it become venereal? Because at the root of the word comes from Venus, but two completely diametrically opposite meaning of the words. So our goal is to understand the copper essence, because copper has everything to do with being a woman. And what we see today is the boys are turning into girls, and we see that pretty profound, the whole transgenderism stuff going on. And at the root of that we see that we have too much copper in the males and they're deficient in the male mineral zinc. And so we see this disbalance going on throughout the entire, the younger generations with every kid. Every autistic kid is too much copper, too little zinc, and that disbalance is profound.
And it's so interesting because there's studies that will come out that say by what I think 2040 or 2045, they say that sperm count is supposed to hit an all-time low, like basically be bottomed out. But then we'll have some people that say, but we're still copper deficient. But with that study in mind, when we see that sperm counts are low and what do men need to produce adequate sperm so they're not shooting blanks, and zinc. And so it's so crazy that there's just so many different little avenues that people miss out on. And they're probably honestly copper toxic if they think that way, because they're driven by the ego or calcified. And I think that is one thing that I've seen a lot of, is it's kind of like, how do you get people to understand, or maybe you can't even get people to understand that we are living in a copper toxic society. Estrogens, we're inundated by them every single day, and zinc is bottomed out too. How do you get people to kind of like understand that aspect of mineral balancing?
Yeah, that's a big mystery, because I've been at this for many years and trying to, teach people about the nuances of mineral balancing. So when they look at their hair test and they say, oh, I have low copper, I'm not toxic in it. And that's what we keep saying. Well, that's all the bio unavailable copper is the toxic buildup, mostly in the liver. And when that copper is building up in the liver, because copper is so reactive, because of its ability to move electrons, it's going to cause a lot of hydroxyl radicals through the Fenton-Weiss chemistry, which is just producing free radicals. The free radicals destroy everything. When we start destroying the liver because of that bioaccumulation of copper in the liver, then the liver starts to get destroyed. And as a result, the liver becomes stagnant. Stagnant livers lead to a fatty liver. A fatty liver will eventually become fibrosed, and the fibrosis leads to the sclerosing and then the malignant cancer. And so we want to understand how important the liver and the copper connection is, and how important the adrenal kidney copper connection is, because those two organs are truly regulating copper in the body. So if we're not cleaning out the liver, we're going to have a lot of bio-unavailable copper in the liver, causing great damage because of the free radical it's producing. So when they look at their hair test, they go, oh, I'm deficient, I need copper. Well, maybe you may need some copper depending on the sodium-potassium ratio, because that's usually how I prescribe copper. But most people won't understand that most of that copper is unbound, and copper, with that energy of Venus, it likes to be in a relationship. It doesn't want to be unbound, single, and free. It wants to be bound to ceruloplasmin, to metallothionein, to albumin. And when it doesn't find its partner, then it will attack anything, and that's where it causes a lot of the damage in the liver. So I don't know if I answered your question, but in a roundabout way, I think I attempted to.
How often do you see gut problems going hand in hand if you run somebody's hair analysis and they have a copper issue? How often do you see their gut, like having to run a GI map next, or a stool test, or some sort of way to kind of see if there's something going on with the gut as well?
Almost across the board, because every patient I test, I'm going to use a hair test, a stool test, a blood test, a urine test, and I'm going to find something. And so what I find is very common is a lot of gut dysbiosis across the board. And then when you look at all the other, blood labs, stool labs, and then you can see how the hair test is revealing what we saw on the blood test. So that's why the hair test gives us the greatest window into what's going on a physiological level, because then on a mental level, when we look at the patterns, it gives us more insight into what's going on on a mental, emotional level. So that's why the hair test is probably the single greatest test to give us practitioners a window into what's going on with your physiology, your emotional state, your spiritual state, because it really is all encompassing when we can look at that hair test without myopia, without, just being programmed to look at single deficient minerals. But when we look at the ratios, the patterns, the metals, the toxic metals, then we gather so much information that makes that test my all-time favorite lab to give me a window into what's going on with you.
Interesting. Yeah, I've seen, especially with myself and having celiac basically my entire life, I did a GI map last year and H. pylori came up, and then I did another one and it dropped a little. It was never in the red, but it was just like slightly present, and then candida, strep, I can't remember what else, but those came up, and it makes a lot of sense because everybody that I see that has copper toxicity, especially myself, always the gut problems because copper lowers zinc, and zinc is needed for hydrochloric acid and sodium as well. And we're living in this society that is fearing sodium and fearing salt, and it's just like such a hit or miss trying to get people to understand. But what would you say to the people that are kind of on the side of like parasites, which obviously parasites are an issue, but kind of to get them to understand that minerals is really where parasites can stem from, because we want to have that stomach acid. Without that stomach acid, which is coming from the copper toxicity, that's where pathogens thrive in a gut environment.
Yeah, absolutely. Whenever we look at all these infections, whether it's candida or parasites or worms or bacterial overgrowth or mold overgrowth, whatever the infection, microbial infection is, behind it, it's always the toxic metals. So, and the deficiency of the nutrient mineral. So if we don't deal with these toxic metals, we're not going to be able to deal with the parasite, with the candida, with the molds and all that stuff. So we always have to understand how important the minerals are in dealing with these microbes. So that's why when you look at iron and you look at everyone has an iron dysregulation thing going on, because you'll see high ferritin pretty commonly. So when there's high ferritin, it's telling me that, bacteria feed off of iron as their food. So iron will go into hiding. It goes into hiding, meaning it goes into ferritin, that storage form of iron. And then the high ferritin is very indicative that you got a lot of infections going on. And then we know that you need copper to deal with the molds, to deal with the candida, to deal with all that stuff. And then you need zinc to actually activate all your white blood cells so you have an aggressive immune system to fight these infections. So when you're looking at a stool test, you always see the Sig-A, the secretory IgA, that's either very low or very high. It's telling me that their immune system is either on overdrive or it's not reacting at all. And so this is why we use those other labs tests, and they really paint the picture to back up and prove everything about what we see on the hair test. And for example, with zinc is, you'll see zinc coming back on a hair test looking pretty normal almost all the time, minus children. When you see your typical adult, that zinc always looks like it's in a normal range. But if you stick with hair testing long enough, you will see it ebb and flow. You'll see it coming down. You'll see it going back up. You'll see it coming down. But to reveal that zinc deficiency, when you look at the blood test, if you see low CO2, that's a zinc deficiency. You see a high anion gap, that's a zinc deficiency. If you see lactic acid, alkaline phos, if you see deviations in alk phos, that enzyme, that's always indicative of a zinc deficiency. Lactic acid, if that's high, that means you're lacking the zinc to get that enzyme to work. So there's many, many indicators on the blood that correspond to a zinc deficiency. And that's where we have to always start webbing and flowing all the labs together to to show how the hair test really is one of the soundest lab tests we have when we understand how to read it intelligently.
Absolutely. So going back to copper and Venus, touch on that a little bit more because that is super interesting that honestly nobody is talking about.
Yeah, to me, it's the most fascinating thing. So copper and Venus. So if you go back in alchemy was the royal science, and that goes back to ancient Egypt and Hermes Trismegistus, the Hermetic science. It's one of the oldest sciences we have. And they understood the metal planet correspondence. So when we look at the 7 visible orbs, so Sun and the Moon, Mars, Mercury, Venus, Saturn, Jupiter, that's the Magnificent Seven. That Magnificent Seven is the 7 chakras, the 7 days in the week, the 7 colors in the rainbow, the 7 verses in the Lord's Prayer, the 7 days of the week, the 7 sins, the 7 virtues, the 7 cervical vertebrae, the 7 layers of skin. You can go on ad infinitum about the magic 7. That 7 is the original 7 visible orbs to the naked eye. So each planet always had a metal. So Venus, since the beginning of time, has always been copper. So what's the most feminine planet in our solar system? It's Venus. Venus and Moon are the 2 feminine archetypal energies in our solar system. So since the beginning of time, copper and Venus have always been intimately related. Then when you look at the iconic masterpiece by Botticelli, who painted The Birth of Venus. The Birth of Venus is the gorgeous Aphrodite. What is she standing on? The calcium shell. That's an oyster shell. And we know how Aphrodite, Venus, copper, we know how copper influences calcium. So we see that relationship. We know how copper gives us that gorgeous bronze tan, and we see that in Aphrodite, in her gorgeous hair, in her gorgeous skin tones and color. So we see that theme of beauty in art playing out in the copper essence. However, what's fascinating about that painting, when Botticelli painted that masterpiece, he painted it on the island of Cyprus. Cyprus in Latin means cuprum. Cuprum means copper. So the birth of the feminine is the birth of copper. So copper, like I said, has absolutely everything to do with being a woman. Even when a woman's pregnant, the estrogens will double, the copper will double. And so we know that since day one. You can even determine the sex of the fetus. If the fetus in the serum has more copper, it's going to be a girl. If it has more iron, it's going to be a boy. So copper and iron have always been the great dialect of men are from Mars, women are from Venus. So women in copper, men in iron. Generally speaking, most men have a little bit more iron. Most women, generally speaking, have a little bit more copper. Now, we all in the population, both men and women, have an excess of this bio-unavailable copper because when we look at it from an astrological point of view, there's 4 great ages: the Iron Age, the Bronze Age, the Silver Age, and the Golden Age. We've been in the Iron Age for the last, approximately 2,000 or so years. So in the Iron Age, that's the patriarch. That's the male-dominating energy that has suppressed the feminine. And in the suppressing of the feminine, we see that iron war mentality going on. And then as we just shifted into the Bronze Age, copper is going to find its place back in balance, but it's not going to happen overnight. Copper has to find that rightful place, meaning the feminine energy has to come up to help balance out this male-dominating patriarchal energy. And that's where we're all walking around as the wounded witch. So what did we do to the witches? The witches were the herbalists, the healers. They were the mothers, the nurturers. So they had that strong moon mothering, nurturing energy that knew the land, that knew the plants, that knew how to heal. So what did we do? We burnt them at the stake. We denigrated them. We destroyed them. We wiped them out. So we went with one pole of this male dominating patriarch, and that was iron. So this is where we see the conflict of iron, and then we see the conflict of Venus. Eventually, in this Bronze Age, bronze is 90% copper and 10% tin. Tin happens to be ruled by the liver. That's showing us that relationship of copper in the liver. That's why I say, when people are talking about making ceruloplasmin, doing this and doing that, ceruloplasmin is manufactured in the liver. If you fix your liver, you will fix ceruloplasmin. However, for that ceruloplasmin to bind to that copper, you need the adrenals, the hormone of the adrenals, especially DHEA, the longevity hormone, sends a signal directly to your liver to tell the copper to bind to the ceruloplasmin, to bind to the albumin, to bind to the metallothionein, to mobilize the copper, to dump the copper. And so this is where we need the hormonal energy of the adrenals communicating with the liver, and that is a beautiful relationship when we understand the energetics of those adrenals. So on those adrenals, it's a kidney adrenal complex. So the kidneys are feminine, the adrenals are masculine, showing that dialect of Mars, Venus once again. And so when we practice mineral balancing, we want to have balance, but we want to understand where are we not understanding the feminine energy. As a male, I have to understand my feminine side. As a woman, you have to understand your masculine side, and you have to get balance. And as we energetically strive for balance in relationships and love and sex and all those themes in life, when we start to get balance, the mineral matrix will start to get balance on an energetic level as we're doing mineral balancing, as we're doing detoxification, as we're supporting organs with homeopathic tinctures and tonics and salt salts. So it's a combination of many, many things. So I know that was long-winded in my talk about Venus, but I just wanted to highlight that Venus has always been the metal of copper, and that is the most feminine planet. That's why copper has everything to do with being a woman. Any questions on that? I know it was long-winded.
Well, I've got so many different paths that I can go down right now. You mentioned copper giving the skin that nice bronze glow. How often do you see people who struggle with sunburns or sun poisoning having a copper imbalance?
Well, that's going to be strongly related to that whole melanin, and we know how copper is so important in the melanin and the tone and scale. You know, the tone and health of the skin has a lot to do with it. And when we're looking at the sun, you know, the sun energy, and when people are getting burnt and susceptible to the sun, because we've been brainwashed to stay out of the sun and to put all these toxins and lather up in the most horrific stuff. So we haven't respected the sun like we should. And the metal of the sun, well, the sun has three metals because there's a sunrise, a midday sun, and a sunset. So the feminine energy of the sun is magnesium. That's why magnesium bursts life on planet Earth, because without magnesium, there is no photosynthesis. Where zinc is birthing life among the human species, because we need that zinc-loaded sperm to hit the ovum, which is the zinc spark of life. So to answer your question with the copper toxicity and the skin issues, big deal. Because if we don't have the melanin to protect the skin, if we don't understand how important that sun is, opening up our eyes to the sun, we're going to miss out a great deal on how to heal the skin intelligently and understanding how copper is very important. The sun is going to have a few things. It's going to have magnesium involved. It's going to have vitamin D involved. It's going to have sulfur involved. It's going to have copper and zinc involved in the whole process of making that healthy skin so we don't get the melanomas and burning too easily or peeling skin and stuff like that. And it's a very indirect way of answering that question without getting too complicated into the whole biochemical pathways of all that, which I don't even know off the top of my head. I'd have to review my notes.
It's really interesting because as a kid, I always got burnt. We would go out in the sun, even we would use sunscreen, and I would burn to a crisp, and then I get impetigo and sun poisoning and rashes, and I would have messed up skin for 2 weeks, cold sores all over my my lips, and then after about, well, I guess it's been 2 or 3 years now, don't burn at all. I can go sit outside and I just get a nice tan in the summer. And it's crazy that it's something that we never think of. And I think that's why a lot of people get so frustrated is they think, how did I not know it could have been magnesium or copper or zinc that was an issue? And I think it kind of, because I think they're, so ego dominant. And I think that gets a lot of people so frustrated and thinking like these tiny little things have such an impact on our overall health and well-being.
Yeah, that's why minerals are a kingdom. So the minerals, when you look at us, we're carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen. That's 97% of who we are. We need the 3%, which is the mineral kingdom that brings life to organic chemistry. We need the inorganic minerals to bring life. That's the spark of life. That's the cosmology bringing life to organic chemistry. And that's why when we look at these minerals, they're cosmic in origin. And so understanding that connection is so powerful in my mind, because when we're dealing with whatever we're dealing with in human health, when we start balancing out the mineral matrix, everything will improve, from gut health to mind health to skin tones to energy levels, because the minerals really bring life to organic carbon-based chemistry. And so this is why we need to have a deeper understanding of the mineral matrix. We have to understand how they are, cosmic in origin. And that's what I want to do, is to bring that into the world of mineral balancing. So we're not always trying to micromanage Niagara Falls, trying to manage every drop of water coming out of there. That's the bean counting that will get you nowhere. When we understand the energy of each mineral. So when everyone's anemic, we think, okay, they're anemic. That's where they're missing that Mars energy. Mars is the impetus that gives us that fighting mentality, so we don't become the doormat, so we don't become, just anemic where we can't fight the good fight, we can't speak our truth. And so we start to understand that Mars energy, which is the red planet is red because of iron. Your blood is red because of iron. So we know that Mars energy in the blood is very, very important to generating energy in the body. And then we have to understand always that Iron-Mars relationship, or that Iron-Venus relationship. That's why I said, if we have a copper toxicity, we need to understand, how do we energetically balance out those minerals? And this is where we have to look at our relationships to others, to lovers, to friends, to family. And if we're conflicted in any of those relationships, you better believe those metals will be conflicted as well. So that's why my goal is to bring that energy into the mineral matrix. So, I know I didn't answer your question.
That's okay. I want to go back to the moon cycles because I think that's so fascinating. I was born on a full moon, June 28th, 99. And what's your thoughts on, because the moon is so closely related to femininity, that now we have women that can go months or years without getting their cycles because of nutritional imbalances, mineral imbalances, xenoestrogens, all the things. And that was such a way for our ancestors to track their cycle, whether they were on the white moon cycle or the red moon cycle or the pink or the purple moon cycle. In your opinion, is that how women's cycles are supposed to be every 28 days, quite literally following the moon?
In traditional senses, absolutely. In every ancient culture, they always went with the lunar calendar, and that lunar calendar is a 28, 29-day cycle, as the menstrual cycle is a 28, 29-day cycle. Just the word menstruation is moon and month. They're intimately related. And so when we see that, you're born on a full moon. So typically on a full moon, that's when we should be ovulating. And when we ovulate on the full moon, that's when women feel sexier. That's when we have more energy. That's when we're more extroverted. That's when we want to be out there engaging and having fun and relationships and parties and more outgoing. And that's when that ovulation is happening due to the pull of the magnetic energy of the moon, the gravitational pull on the moon, the biophotonic energy of the moon. That's light. Light influences the whole fertility cycle. So fertility and moon have been ingrained since the beginning of time. And so when we go into when we start bleeding on the new moon, that's when we need to mother ourselves. And mothering ourselves is sleeping more, becoming more introverted, taking time to be more with you in meditation and sleeping and journaling, taking time to reflect like the moon, because the moon reflects the light of the sun. And so on the new moon, we should be menstruating. On the full moon, we should be ovulating. But because we have been under this patriarchal, male-dominating culture, that whole cycle has been wiped out completely. So this is why we see so many women, their cycles are just so off in the mineral matrix. Then when you look at the moon is sodium, is a classic moon mineral. Silver, of course, is, and zinc is a big moon mineral. And sodium and zinc specifically, when those are off, your menstrual cycle will be off. And that's going to also pave the way for that copper toxicity, because you're going to have low zinc, high copper. And this is why when you look at the organs of the moon, specifically the pineal gland is a moon energy. So anyone born on a full moon is going to be more prone to psychological things, from insomnias to depressions to anxieties to fears to phobias to food addictions and all that type of stuff. So what's the first drug we're given in the hospital? So when a mother is pregnant and they want to induce the labor, what do they give the pregnant mother to induce the labor? They give you Pitocin. Pitocin is synthetic oxytocin. So they're giving you synthetic oxytocin. That's a posterior pituitary hormone. That posterior pituitary hormone, where the anterior pituitary is the sun, the posterior pituitary is the moon. And in that oxytocin, that moon energy governs those contractions. But when you're given that synthetic oxytocin, that will cause a contraction that becomes so unbearable that now they have to give you an epidural. So right from the get-go, they're giving you synthetic oxytocin, then an epidural, and then the child is born. Then the doctor takes that cold stainless steel, cuts the umbilical cord before they feel the pulse. That cord should not be cut, because in that cord, that's the stem cell blood going into the baby. When they cut that too quickly, the baby doesn't get the stem cell download. And so we're doing everything wrong. We're in a dark womb cave for 9 months. We come out in a cold steel environment with blistering lights and into the sterile environment. So we're doing birth wrong from the get-go. Now that synthetic oxytocin, that Pitocin that they're giving with you, that cuts off the connection. That's where we don't feel connected. We lose the trust. We lose the bond. And everyone that has been subjected to that synthetic oxytocin, we can see that with feeding orders. So the baby may not latch on as an infant, then the baby's gonna, as an adult, is gonna have feeding issues its whole life. Then the baby that lost that connection of that oxytocin cuddling hormone, love hormone, when that's off, they're gonna be confused with feeling connected in this world to significant others and love and fertility and all those connections. So we're doing everything wrong, and that pineal and that posterior pituitary are ruled by the moon. And that's the unconscious, that's the dark side, that's the receptive side, that's the feeling side, that's the emotional side. And when we don't have that brain chemistry on from the get-go, we're going to have problems in all phases of our life, depending on, what's going on at any particular cycle during our development. So when we see these children being born cesarean, not getting the breast milk, getting the oxytocin, getting the epidurals, not cutting the cord properly, you wonder why we have fertility issues. You wonder why we have mental issues, because we're doing everything wrong from the womb to the tomb. We're doing it wrong because we lost that real grounding to the laws of the universe. We're operating by laws of man, not laws of the universe, laws of man that are telling us, what's right, what's wrong, when cultures have been delivering babies for millions of years without the oxytocin, without the epidurals. So we do everything wrong, and then we wonder why we're getting all these toxic metals in utero, and why we're getting all these chemicals in utero, and why we have the autistic thing going off the top shelf, why we have so many developmental things, and women's periods are so dysregulated. And behind those women periods, we see periods from hell. And it all starts with that pineal gland and that pituitary, posterior pituitary, that are really regulating that moon energy for us to have, good menstrual cycles. So again, that was another long-winded approach. Did I kind of answer the question in that?
Yeah, no, you did. And I've always said that a fluoridated or a calcified society is a society that's easily controlled. And it makes sense. When I broke up my calcium shell, I had a huge awakening, which I had already was aware of things, especially that were going on in 2020 and vaccines. And I was already starting to come to light then. But then it was almost like another, higher, you step into a higher level of consciousness almost. And that's what I think plays a role in it too, is so many people are like, you bash women for their choices, but it's like, no, because if you nourished yourself, if you actually were aware of what's going on, you would know that they're profiting off of you by doing the Pitocin and then the epidural, and then you have to get a C-section, and then they rush to give a vitamin K shot, and then all of the vaccines, and they cut the cord early, and it's this domino effect that we see it, but people that aren't nourished, they have that calcified or that fluoridated pineal gland, they're not seeing these effects of what's really going on, kind of like having a bird's eye view of things like we are, if that makes sense.
Sure does. I mean, when you look at that pineal gland, that pineal gland is housed in the diencephalon. So in that diencephalon, the thalamus, the parts of that diencephalon, which is the primitive brain, which is the copper brain, but it also houses that pineal gland, that sacred gland. That's the eye of Buddha, the eye of Christ, the eye of Ra. That's and in that gland, it gives you the serotonin and the melatonin. That's the light and the dark. Between the light and the dark is the DMT, the dimethyltryptamine. That's the spirit molecule that gives us dreams and visions and precognition and telepathy, and gives us our ability to see the world more from a psychedelic perspective, where we're not stuck in, just the serotonin or the melatonin. We see that that DMT is that spirit molecule that connects us to this multi-dimensional universe. And that's the beautiful thing about that pineal gland. That pineal gland, because it's housed in that diencephalon, it's not protected by the blood-brain barrier. So because that pineal gland isn't protected by the blood-brain barrier, and it has the second largest blood supply of all the organs and glands in the body. Number one is the kidneys. The second largest blood supply is the pineal. So you've got this pineal gland with the second largest blood supply, not protected by the blood-brain barrier, which makes it a perfect gland to be infiltrated with toxins and fluoride and calcium deposits and all the garbage to help, which stifles that gland from vibrating at the right frequency. And as a result, when it's not vibrating at that right frequency, then it's going to start to calcify. As that gland calcifies, it takes away our dreams, our vision, making us easier to control. So if you don't have your own dreams and your own goals and your own vision, they will make sure they give you dreams, goals, and visions that they want you to accomplish. We want to have our own third eye, inner vision to see our true life path and what we're supposed to do in this, earthly existence that we have. So by controlling the pineal gland, they control human consciousness. That's why they fluoridated your water. That's why they dumped a gazillion of chemicals into us from the moment we're born, because they can start calcifying that pineal gland from day one. And again, it doesn't calcify in one day, but systematically, each decade passes, it becomes more calcified, less melatonin. Less melatonin, we lose that ability to recover in the sleep cycle, to get real deep sleep. We know that melatonin is in every cell in the body. We know it's an antioxidant. We know it protects the brain. We know it has everything to do with bones. So they are destroying us from the moment we're born. And this is where we have to raise our awareness. So if we're going to have a fighting chance in this new age, in this new world order, we have to be able to see what they are doing to us. So every problem creates a solution. So what's the solution? Stay away from that medical system. Learn how to do home birthing. Learn how to heal yourself with mineralization and detoxification. And that's where the real smart money is at. When we take the authority to heal ourselves, because healing is always between you and God. So there is not one authority that can tell you how to heal, because that's an intimate relationship between you and God. We use helpers such as you or myself and other practitioners to help guide people, to get them on a mineral balancing program, to teach them about copper toxicity, to teach them how to get that toxic copper out, how to pick up that zinc, how to pick up that magnesium, how to use homeopathic remedies when we have an acute flare-up or when we need organ support. We use the time-tested things that we've had really since the beginning of time. And when we talk about homeopathy, the only doctor immortalized in your nation's capital is the founder of homeopathy, Samuel Hahnemann, because he used to prescribe homeopathic remedies for the presidents, and he's the only one immortalized in your nation's capital. Yet the first attack was always on homeopathy. Whole Foods doesn't sell homeopathic remedies anymore, so they're attacking us. So that's fine. They can do whatever they want. We have to do what's right. And that's what this whole shifting of the age is as we leave the Iron Age, go into the Bronze Age. So in this Bronze Age, the human consciousness is going to pick up. But in doing so, copper is going to be very dysregulated in the beginning phases until it finds its rightful place in balancing out the zinc, balancing out the iron. And then as we start to understand these themes and the lies that we've been told, and this is why we want to have third eye, inner vision to question things, to see what is my dream, what are my goals, where is my connection to this multi-universe? So we're not going to be, stifled by religions, by science. Scientism and religion has done more harm to humanity than anything. So that's where I'm at with that.
Well, and it's so interesting. I was having this conversation the other day of people when they finally do wake up to the lies that they've been told throughout the years. And some people could be, 60 years old and finally be becoming aware of what's actually going on within the world. And they just have a full-out mental breakdown. There's some people that actually can't handle it, and they either off themselves or they get on pharmaceuticals to give themselves just like a being at a baseline because they can't mentally handle that they were lied to by their school teacher, by their high school teacher, by their college professor, by the government, who we trust to keep us safe in their military.
By our rabbis, our priests, by everyone we've been lied to. And that's why truth, the real healing ingredient is truth. So that's the healing frequency we have to be on. And so that's why we want to question everything. That's why we want to be able to have that inner vision, because that's how we can see through this bullshit. And during this awakening process, when you shine, if you took a flashlight and wake someone up and shine that light in their eyes, they're going to get mad at you. They're going to be upset that you shine the light, because the light is going to irritate at first. But as we build our constitution up, as we build up some reserves, as we get some resiliency, then we can start peeling the onion of the fabrications of lies that we've been subjected to really for thousands of years. And so we're walking around with ancestral traumas, we're walking around with the witch's wound, and everyone has the witch's wound. When I refer to that, I'm talking about we've lost that energy to the feminine, the real nurturers, the healers of this planet. Because that moon is the mother is the nurturer is nutrition. That nutrition starts with that mother's milk. What is the oligarchs are telling you? Formula fed. Forget about breast milk. Poison you, so the breast milk is so tainted that you can't even drink the mother's milk. And so every woman has been under attack for quite some time. And that's why mineral balancing is physical, emotional, and spiritual. And that's the trinity I'm running with, because that's how we're going to build ourselves up so we can have a fighting chance to age gracefully and healthy without ever getting cancer or brain diseases or ending up in a nursing home. The worst thing ever is dying in a nursing home. So that's why we do what we're doing today, because the goal is to age gracefully. To do that, you better know about calcium, because calcium's going to get us all in the end. And we see when calcium precipitates out of solution, that becomes all your deposition diseases. Those deposition diseases are the atherosclerosis, arterial sclerosis, the joint, the calcium buildup in the joints, the gallstones, the kidney stones, the cataracts. You have calcification is the hallmark of premature aging. That's why our goal, if we have a shell, we got to break that shell. If we're in a 4-low, we have to build up that mineral grid. If we're in a sympathetic dominant pattern, we have to understand how to get into parasympathetic. We got to understand how important it is to modulate and regulate calcium, because it's going to get us all in the end. So when you die, you go into rigor mortis. Rigor mortis is a full-blown contraction. That's what rigor mortis is. That's because magnesium, the spark of life, is no longer there to oppose calcium. So all the calcium channels are released, and that causes the full-blown contraction, rigor mortis. That's why calcium has also always been associated with Saturn. Saturn is the furthest from the sun. It's cold, it's distant, it's dark, and it's father time, it's Chronos, it's aging. So our goal is to age gracefully by understanding the minerals, the energy of the minerals, and understanding just how do we heal the body so we can have better vision, third eye vision, 2 eyes to look, only 1 eye to see. And when we can see, Now we're going to start doing the right things. Now we're going to start beating to our drum, not these man-made laws and rules and religions of the world. All that is used to control human consciousness. We're freeing ourselves, and that's what we're seeing in this age, which is very exciting to see this. I knew this was going to play out 20 years ago. I've had many conversations. So 9/11 shook us up, but did it wake us up?
Yeah.
So it woke some people up, but it hasn't woken the majority up, and we're still spellbound. We're still under this spell, and that's why they broadcast the energy out there, because they're feeding you with propaganda. So we got to break the spell cast. We have to start practicing real magic, which is white magic. White magic is when you master fire, water, air, earth. When those four elements come together, then they amalgamate together, and now you create real health. And that's what Chinese medicine is about. They got the four elements, and their fifth element is wood. Wood represents a tree. So when those four elements come together, then you create the tree of life, the tree of knowledge, the bronchial tree, the aortic tree. How man is an inverted tree. And it's the balancing of the four elements. When they are in balance, we create the fifth magical element, the ethereal element, the quintessence. And that's why we use this ancient knowledge that's there, and we understand the modern day science, and we combine those two worlds to really give us a fighting chance to thrive in this new age.
Interesting. Yeah, I think more people are finally starting to wake up. And something that I've noticed, which you probably have too, all the people that got the COVID vaccine, a lot of them have calcium shells, and they break up their calcium shell and they're like, shoot, why did I do that to myself? Why was I so dumb? Why did I just dumb down and listen? And it's so interesting because they have that kind of that aha moment of what did I just do? So I think it's coming full circle with people. Yeah. I think people are finally starting to.
That's the spell. That's the hypnotic spell we're under. Yeah. And we're under, and that's why the news is broadcasting, get your COVID, do this, put your mask on. Just brainwashing over and over. And so we have to sever the shackles that are enslaving us to be the real human we were meant to be. And this is part of what getting healthy is. It's not just taking a mineral. It's about getting healthy to live out your dreams and to do what motivates you, to what inspires you. The word inspiration, when you breathe in, we inspire. That's what is inspiring you, and then we let go what is no longer needed through the expiration. And that's why the yogis always knew that CO2 is very important in the body. So when you have melatonin will be converted into that DMT. How does that melatonin go from melatonin to DMT? It's called decarboxylation. It loses the CO2. So when melatonin loses just the CO2, carbon dioxide, then you create the spirit molecule. That's why the yogis always told us, learn how to breathe, understanding the importance of breath. All CO2 is regulated via the mineral zinc, because zinc is what allows the CO2 to be dispersed throughout, to get the CO2 out of every cell in the body, specifically red blood cells, but all the cells that have CO2, you need the zinc, because the zinc is making the carboxy anhydrase enzyme with this carbonic acid. Carbonic acid regulates all the CO2 in all the tissues, organs, and glands. And that's why that CO2 is so important, and that's why it's connected to the zinc. So we start to make all these little kind of weird connections, and we start seeing, wow, there's a picture here that we need to paint.
Yeah, and a lot of people are even breathing the wrong way. I mean, since day one, a lot of people snoring, mouth breathers, sleep apnea is so on the rise too.
Yeah, we do everything wrong from the get-go. Especially with the insult of religion has done a number psychologically on us. So you have all the major religions telling you what God is. I can't even begin to tell you the ineffable God. We don't have a concept, but then you have these man-made things telling you what is right, what is wrong. We have to learn how to abide by our moral compass, and when we get healthy and in balance, we're going to start beating to a better drum, meaning we're not going to get as angry, we're not going to become as volatile or as belligerent, we're not going to be the doormats, we're going to be able to have the adrenal reserves to fight the good fight, to speak our truth, so we don't become the slave in the system. And that's why getting healthy is a fundamental must to survive and thrive in the new age, but it takes a different paradigm. So we have to break this old paradigm. We have to come back to what works. Get healthy, focus on, get the minerals, clean up the gut, clean out that liver, clean out those kidneys, understand the emotion behind everything. Then we have a real fighting chance of, taking our health to that place where it's supposed to be. Because I want invincible health. I don't want to just make it to 100. I want to be 100, 105, 110, still being able to drive, still being able to walk, still being able to cook for myself, and being able to take care of myself at whatever age I'm at. And that's my goal. Whether I get there or not, that's to be determined, but it's a goal worth dying for.
Yep, and that's a good point. By the time people are in their 70s, they're sitting in a nursing home. They have no mobility. They can wheel themselves by barely in their wheelchair. They're still eating fast food, sodas, and I look at that because my grandfather and my grandmother were both in nursing homes, and I look back and I was like, I'm such an empath, so it was not a good environment to be in anyway. But I reflect back on it, and that's not normal for us to be dying alone, dying with random people, dying with all these lights shining on top of us, hooked up to monitors. I think that's so unnatural from how we were supposed to be within a community, and still being able to go walk 10,000 miles a day and forage and kill our own food and prepare our own food. We're so disconnected, even from the time of birth to the time of death. So disconnected.
Yeah, we really are. And that's why what the work we're doing to help our, maybe, the patients we have, or the, whoever you're working with, they may not have all the knowledge that you have, or understand the occulted version of our history, the hidden hand that's running things. They may not care about any of that stuff, but if we could start getting them healthier, they're going to start vibrating at a better frequency, and then things start clicking. Then they start saying, oh, I'm not going to get COVID, or I'm going to work on my health so I don't end up in a nursing home. Because that's the worst way to go out. These nursing homes, the way we do death in this country is god-awful. We don't respect the elders. We don't respect the young. It's just a nightmare, but every problem creates a solution. So that's why we are the warriors in this day and age, so we can start help to healing our fellow brothers and sisters, to pick them up if they want help. Not everyone wants the help, and we have to be able to work with those that really do want to heal, because many people will just continue to go down, follow the Pied Piper, and this is why 1 out of 2 adults will get a cancer diagnosis in 2024. When Nixon waged the war on cancer in the 70s, you would think cancer would have gone down. Cancer has skyrocketed. So all this pink ribbon nonsense and all this fighting cancer, we don't understand cancer. Cancer is a disease of toxicity, chemicals, metals, radiation, what causes a cell to mutate. Then the guardian of the genome is the p53 gene. It's the anti-cancer gene, the apoptosis gene. That p53 gene absolutely has a zinc finger. That zinc finger in that enzyme is what allows it to go to the mutated part of the DNA, so it can bind to the binding domain of the mutated DNA. So then the p53 enzyme can delete it, or repair it, or just stop the cell cycle while it repairs it. And that's the importance of zinc. That's why I say there really is a war on zinc
Yeah.
And we don't understand that zinc deficiency in the entire world, 1/3 of the world has a gross zinc deficiency. That's coming, not the band. The World Health Organization is telling us 1/3 of the world has a gross zinc deficiency. I'm on record saying that most of us, 99% of the population, is walking around with marginal zinc deficiencies. And that's why when we start to understand zinc, zinc is the spiritual warrior always fighting for the greater good. And it's going to have a moon energy, it's going to have a Venus energy, it's going to have a Mars energy, it's going to have a huge Jupiterian energy, and it's going to have a sun energy. So it's like the higher octave of all the other minerals, yet zinc doesn't get the respect it deserves.
No, and it's so funny because the World Health Organization, I think even back in the 70s, posted something about too much copper. And they're literally laying out the pieces of the puzzle for us, but nobody's ever putting them actually together. We're still misplacing them, or we're losing puzzle pieces down the street. And it's so funny when you actually look at what the studies that they come out with and read between the lines. Like, they tell us what we need to do. We just don't want to do it.
They always have to tell you, and that's part of the, that's the, I guess what it's called is the revelation of the method. The rulers always have to tell you what's going on. So the Simpsons have this skit called A World Without Zinc. They're letting you know a world without zinc, nothing works. And in that skit, they have the battery. The battery is the juice of life. And so they're saying the battery won't work, the gun won't work, the gun represents your immune system. And in that skit, they also have the gun, the battery. And
it was in black and white, too. It was in black and white, too, which makes a lot of sense because zinc is so important for our eye health.
Oh, absolutely. And just like that vitamin A we think of for eye health, that vitamin A and that vitamin D, in fact, all fat-soluble vitamins better have a zinc finger so you can read, for gene expression. You got to have that zinc finger. So no one talks about that. So the Simpsons being the great Nostradamus of today, predicting Super Bowl victories, predicting Trump's victory, they have nailed it. When they tell you there's a war on zinc, that there is, an absolute zinc deficiency going on, we need to take that a little bit serious to say, all right, why are men shooting blanks? Why we can't get, most young couples can't get pregnant today. Yep. That's a big, big deal. Yep. And so this is where we need that masculine energy of zinc, which is a higher superlative of copper, higher superlative of iron, higher superlative of all the trace elements on the table. Because it's the only metal on the transitional metals that doesn't transition. It's redox inert, where copper, iron, manganese, cobalt, chromium are all redox metals. Zinc is redox inert, so it helps to bring stability and stabilizing the mineral matrix. So that's why minerals are so fascinating.
They are, and I've been working with a handful of fertility clients the past couple of months, and I always say, is your husband on board? Because his mineral status means just as much. I mean, you're carrying the baby, but sperm is so important for the egg to fertilize and then for the placental creation. And so many of them are just like, no. And it kind of blows my mind that all of the work just gets put on the woman because they think she's carrying the baby, her health, she needs to be detoxing, she needs to be taking the supplements. Doesn't matter what I'm doing. I can still drink alcohol and go out and so.
Yeah. Meanwhile, 50% of all the men have no sperm.
Yep.
Now, here's another thing about the moon that no one really knows about. So, we know that, it's called a lunar cycle, a lunar return, a lunar angle, a second chance ovulation. So, your lunar cycle, aka your lunar return, aka your lunar angle, is the moment you took your first breath, is where the angle of the moon and the sun, what is that angle of the moon and the sun the moment you took your first breath? So if it was at a solar eclipse, it's at 0. If it's at a full moon, so you can go anywhere from 0 to 360 degrees. And so you want to find out where your lunar angle is. That lunar angle is the angle of the sun and the moon the moment you took your first breath. On that lunar angle, for a man, your sperm is going to be 10x. That's the time you want to have, if your wife is ovulating at that time, that would be the time that you'd want to give your genetic material, because that's that lunar angle where your sperm is going to be 10x. That's where your genetic material is going to be a lot stronger. So then for the woman, have you ever heard of women getting pregnant while pregnant, or getting pregnant while on birth control, or getting pregnant while menstruating? That means that they had sex on their lunar angle. So on their lunar angle, even if they're menstruating, even if they're on birth control, or even if they're pregnant, they have the chance to get pregnant on that lunar angle. That lunar angle is something that no one really understands, but it explains this, immaculate conception. How did this woman get pregnant when she's menstruating? And that's where it causes a second chance ovulation due to the photonic energy of the moon, due to the light of the moon, due to the gravitational pull of the moon. And if sex was to happen on your lunar angle, you have the chance to get pregnant. This is why understanding that moon energy is so important, especially for fertility and especially for contraception. So we don't have to use all these other ugly chemicals and things like that. And that came from the lunar angle, the lunar cycle. That came from Dr. Jonas, who was this very Catholic doctor back in the day, and he didn't like doing abortions. And he read this text from Babylon, this astrological text, talking about you can get pregnant on that lunar angle, on that lunar return, because that will cause a spontaneous ovulation. And if sex was to happen on that lunar angle, you have the potential of getting pregnant, even if you're on birth control, even if you're menstruating, even if you're pregnant. Pretty interesting stuff I found, and especially for young couples, to work with an astrologer to find out when it's going to be the best fertile time for you to get pregnant. Where is your lunar angle? Then coordinating the man's lunar angle with the woman's lunar angle is a little bit more difficult, because they can be at different time zones or different time period. So that's why I work with an astrologer to find out these little things, so you know when it's going to be right for pregnancy. That's important stuff that we know nothing about, because we're so disconnected from that silver cord.
Is there an astrologer that you recommend that maybe does readings online, or can work with people virtually?
I don't have any personal ones, but this is the book that I got that lunar angle from. It's called The Lunar Cycle. And so they go deep into that, what that lunar cycle is, that lunar angle is. Then when you find an astrologer, you want to find an astrologer that understands this lunar angle, aka lunar return, lunar angle, lunar cycle, aka second chance ovulation. Because if I wanted to, give my sperm to my wife, I want it to be on my lunar angle so they can get the best version of me. And so, especially men that are struggling with sperm, and, as we're building up the zinc, and, if you don't get these toxic metals out, if you don't get mercury out, mercury will block thousands of ions of zinc. Right. Copper will block ions of zinc. Cadmium will block ions of zinc. All these toxic metals, lead and aluminum, they're blocking the zinc. The phytates block the zinc, the oxalates. When a zinc is bound to an oxalate, it's bound to the oxygens, it's irreversibly bound, and it will never be absorbed. It will just go right out into the stool. This is why many things are very antagonistic to zinc and magnesium. Magnesium is a +2, zinc is a +2. Those +2 metals, really the only difference is zinc is tightly bound, magnesium is loosely bound. So that's why that ATP is loosely bound, so it can spark that adenosine triphosphate in creating energy, where zinc is going to be a little bit more strongly bound to the proteins.
Interesting. So fascinating that nobody talks about this.
Nobody talks about that. That lunar cycle is one of the most interesting things. And so, as as a practitioner, if you know the man has low zinc, we're working on that. But to get that zinc up, you better get those metals out. To get those metals out, you better understand the biggest antagonizer is mercury, cadmium, copper. They will deplete your zinc like no tomorrow.
Yeah.
And so that's why understanding the minerals and understanding the astrology, understanding the metal planet correspondence, that gives us more of working material, how we can really start to energize the minerals in us. Because like I said, they're not just dead rocks. They have a life, they have a cosmology, they have a billion-year history of the cosmology encapsulated in mineral form that makes us all star people. We're all connected. We're all from the stars. So we go to the grades 1 through 12.
Yep.
Where we get schooled is above through the 12 houses. That's the real school, when we understand how to get schooled from the houses above, not this nonsense we go through grades 1 through 12 that just teach you rote memorization, to never question things, to never really dig a little bit deeper. Yeah. So they're programming us from the very get-go. We have to become, we have to quit worshiping the fallen stars, and we have to look up to the heavens to see the real stars and to understand those stars are the metals in us. And that's where we really can take our mineral balancing practice to that next level.
Absolutely. That's so fascinating. Thank you so much for sharing.
Oh, it's my pleasure. I love this stuff.
Oh, I know. I could go on and on and on all day long.
Right.
Well, do you have any other, is there any other book recommendations maybe that you could give people besides the lunar cycle book for them to dig a little bit deeper in?
I'm going to encourage people to learn tissue salts, because the salts, when you're doing mineral balancing, you're going to find these tissue salts become amazing helpers along the way. Because if you're doing mineral balancing and there's, we're trying to raise calcium and we can't move the needle in calcium, come in with the tissue salts from the calcium family, the calcium fluoride, the calcium phos, the calcium fluoride. So we can use the tissue salts to help the mineral grid. We can use the tissue salts if we get an aggravation. So if we start dumping copper and we get a headache, then we have some of the tissue salts to help placate the headache. Maybe we have to give nat-mer. Maybe we have to give iron phos in potency. And so just start to learn about the tissue salts and start to become more an introductory into homeopathy. Keep learning about the energy of the planet metal correspondence. And I got a gazillion books on those. I got Metal Magic, the metal planet relationship, the metal power. I have about 10 other books just on alchemical books on these metals, because it's giving you a story of the metal and the planet and their correspondence. And so when we start using these little books to understand, copper, Venus, Mars, iron, and when you think of Mars, which day of the week would Mars be?
I feel like it would be either a Monday or a Thursday.
Okay, let's think Monday, moon.
Okay,
so Monday is the moon. So Monday, Tuesday. What do we do on Tuesdays? Vote on Tuesdays. Declarations of war on Tuesdays. Presidential speeches on Tuesday. the infamous 9/11 on Tuesday. So, of course, that has to be the planet of war. That is Mars. So, we all agree on the 7 days of the week. Every country agrees on the 7 days of the week. We disagree on everything else because that is the incorruptible 7 orbs to the naked eye. So, Saturday is Saturn, Sunday is the sun, Monday is the moon, Tuesday is Mars, Wednesday is Mercury, Thursday is Jupiter, Friday is Venus. Why do we love Fridays? Because it's the day of love. And so we start to understand this energy. Why do we have Thanksgiving on Thursday? What do? We eat because that's the liver, the Jupiter energy. So when we start to understand the energy and the cycles we go through, so the first 0 to 7 years, you're in a moon cycle. Then when you hit your 7th birthday, you're going to go into a Mercury cycle. Mercury is communication, intelligence, speech, and reading and writing. And that's where we get a lot of throat infections, ear infections, nasal infections, because as the child finds conflict in communication, it may show up as a throat infection or an ear infection or sinus infection. Then what planet comes online when we hit 14, when we enter puberty? The first copper timeline. So we go into a 7-year copper, from 14 to 21 is the first 7-year copper cycle. And then we go into 3 7-year sun cycles. Then we go into a 7-year Mars cycle. Then we go into a 7-year Jupiter cycle. Then we go into the cycle I'm in, which is Saturn. So Saturn is 56 to 63. At 61, I'm in the tail end of my Saturn cycle. Then when I turn 63, then I'm going to repeat the moon cycle. And in that moon cycle, the moon governs the pineal, the pituitary, the breast, the stomach, the uterus. So when you think of the moon, that's the orb that changes sizes and shape more frequently than any luminary above. So what changes sizes and shape more than anything? Your breast do, your stomach does, your uterus does. So that's the law of correspondence. That's why when we learn about these little metal magics and metal planet relationships and metal power, then we start to understand the energy of these minerals that we're taking. So we're not just blindly just taking copper or just taking iron or just taking zinc. We're understanding the energy behind it. And when we understand the energy behind it, then it's going to work its magic.
Interesting. Thank you so much.
You're very welcome.
So many different rabbit holes we can go down.
Yeah.
Especially starting with these books. Well, thank you so much for coming on. I appreciated talking to you. You're on Instagram. What is your username if people wanted to go follow you, follow your content, your website?
The best place to find me probably would be, I guess my website, Back to Natural Health, is where people can, connect to me. So Back to Natural Health. I don't pay attention to the other, to Twitter or anything. My marketing guy does, but I don't. The only thing I know is a little bit of Facebook. So I know how to navigate on Facebook, but I have a lot of YouTube videos. I have a lot of, I put the YouTube moon video, which will go over that lunar cycle, that lunar angle a little bit more intelligently than how I explained it today. Because I need my diagrams, I need my notes in front of me to kind of really explain it in detail like it should.
Okay, so I can link that in the show notes. I can go find it, and I'll link it in the show notes for people if they want to go back and watch that then.
Great.
Perfect.
Appreciate that.
Thank you so much.